Welcome to Math Puzzle Channel. I'm Mr. Charles. Today we're going to discuss a question from a Math Olympiad competition. If you are interested in Math Olympiad, feel free to check out the playlist on our YouTube page. You will find other similar videos there. Here is the question. 13 children are seated around a round table. With the rule that boys will always lie to girls but tell the truth to other boys, while girls will always lie to boys but tell the truth to other girls. One child started by telling the right side neighbor, "Most of us are boys." Then the neighbor told his or her right side neighbor, "Most of us are girls." And so they went on passing the message around, alternating between the two phrases, until the last child told the first one, "Most of us are boys." How many boys are seated at the table? Feel free to pause the video if you need some time to give this question a try. When you're ready, please resume the video. I will guide you through a step-by-step explanation of how to solve it. Let's start by making some assumptions. The situation in this logic puzzle is a bit more complex than the ones we've discussed before, which only focused on assumptions about whether someone was telling the truth. In this case, we also need to make assumptions about the gender of the child who started to pass the message. The first child can be a boy or a girl, and he or she can be telling the truth or lying. That gives us 4 possible scenarios. We'll go through each one to see any of them have contradictions. Before we start analyzing different scenarios, we should first have a better understanding of the sentence, "Most of us are boys or girls." Since there are 13 children at the table, it is impossible to have an equal number of boys and girls. If one group, either boys or girls, has 7 or more children, then that group becomes the majority and can describe themselves as "most of us." This is an important detail to keep in mind as we explore the possible scenarios. Let's use a picture to make it easier to understand and analyze. The large circle in the middle represents the round table, while the 13 smaller circles represent the children, with the bottom circle representing the first child. Now, we start by assuming the first child is a boy who is telling the truth. In this scenario, based on what he says, we can tell most of them are boys. If he is telling the truth, it implies that his right neighbor is also a boy, as boys only speak the truth to boys. Then, his neighbor alters the message and says that most of them are girls, which means he is lying. So the next child is a girl. This girl alters the message and says that most of them are boys, which is a fact under this assumption. Therefore, she is talking to a girl. The girl alters the message again and says most of them are girls. So she is lying. It implies that the next child is a boy. A boy saying, "Most of us are boys," is just like the first child. So we could see a pattern. It repeats every 4 children. We could avoid analyzing the exact statement and situation for every child by recognizing this repeating pattern. We can see the last child is just like the first child, in that he is a boy telling the truth and saying most of them are boys. His right side neighbor, who is the first child, is also a boy. So it is no problem for him to speak the truth. Also, we can observe that there are altogether 7 boys and 6 girls. So the inference based on the assumption that most of them are boys is correct. There are no contradictions, thus making this assumption valid. In this case, 7 boys are seated at the table. We have found an answer, but we should still go through all the other scenarios to see if there are any other possible situations or answers. Before we continue, we should first find a quicker way to solve this question. From the first scenario, we've already found a pattern that repeats every 4 children. If you look closely at the pattern, you will see that the scenarios we're going to discuss are already included in it. The pattern repeats itself every 4 children, regardless of the specific scenario. So, after the pattern has repeated 3 times, the situation of the 13th child, who is the last child in this question, must be the same as the first child's. If the first child is a girl who is telling the truth, then the last child would also be a girl who is telling the truth. Additionally, if we examine any 4 consecutive children, regardless of where we start counting, there must be 2 boys and 2 girls. Therefore, across the first 12 children, which includes 3 repetitions, there must be 6 boys and 6 girls, regardless of the specific scenario. Now, let's continue examining the remaining scenarios, with the observations we've made. In scenario 2, we assume the first child is a lying boy. If that were the case, then the last child would also have to be a lying boy. A boy always speaks the truth to another boy. However, the last boy would be lying to his right-side neighbor, who is known to be a boy. This creates a contradiction. So the initial assumption that the first child is a lying boy is invalid. Then, let's consider the scenario 3 where the first child is a girl who is telling the truth. In this case, the last child would also be a girl who is telling the truth. Girl always speaks truthfully to another girl. This does not contain any contradictions. If the first child is telling the truth, it would imply that most of the children are boys. From our previous observations, we know there must be an equal number of 6 boys and 6 girls across the first 12 children. With the last child being a girl, that would result in a total of 6 boys and 7 girls. This contradicts the statement that most of the children are boys, as we established in the previous discussion that only a group of 7 or more children can be considered as most of the children. Therefore, the initial assumption that the first child is a girl who is telling the truth is also invalid. Finally, let's consider the scenario where the first child is a girl who is lying. In this case, according to our previous observations, the last child would also have to be a lying girl. However, this creates a contradiction, as it is impossible for the last girl to lie to her neighbor, who is also a girl. A girl always speaks the truth to another girl. Therefore, the initial assumption that the first child is a lying girl must be invalid. After considering all the scenarios, we can conclude that only the assumption in scenario 1 is valid, while the others are invalid. Therefore, we can conclude that the first child must be a boy who is telling the truth. So, according to our previous analysis, the answer is 7 boys are seated at the table. I will create more videos focusing on various mathematical problem-solving skills. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more math content. See you later.